a couple of components. First is we identify what it is we're trying to reconcile, and in this case, inventory. And what we are doing is we are comparing numbers between our inventory subsystem in JD Edwards and the general ledger. So it becomes a balancing act. So what we need to do is we need to get data from each of the individual systems and kind of line them up to make sure that they're in sync. That's what the reconciliation process is. So in order to do that in JD Edwards, the typical process, what we have to do first is we have to get some type of inventory report out of the system. So of course, JD Edwards has a canned report, but most companies that I talk to, they don't really use that. They have something that they've developed themselves. But it's straightforward. It's, you know, the item numbers, the branch plants, the locations, the quantities, costs, and then finally the extended costs. Now we take this information and we need to match it up to a trial balance sheet that we get from the general ledger. So on this side, what we have is our inventory accounts with dollar amounts in them for period end. So what we're trying to do now is we're trying to take a report that contains items and branch plants and compare it to a different report that has account numbers on it. So it gets kind of cumbersome. So we have to take some data and manipulate it a little bit in order to compare apples to apples. And how we do that, it normally involves Excel. So we'll get some kind of export from the inventory system, whether we subtotal it by geo, class, or whatever. Then we have to line it up to the accounts and the balances that are listed on the trial balance sheet. And then that's where all the frustration comes in. The numbers don't match. We don't know why. We don't know where to start. So what we're going to do is we're going to identify what the top 6 issues are. And I'm going to do it right now at a high level, and then we're going to go through each one individually. So to get started, the first, and certainly one of the most important, is automatic accounting instructions. You might know them as DMAAIs, the Distribution Manufacturing Automatic Accounting Instructions. This is responsible for over 70% of reconciling items that I've looked at over the last 20 years. So it is a big, big contributor. So we'll talk some about that. Geo class codes and how we control them, another big factor. The geo class code is the key piece of information between the inventory system and the general ledger. It controls where the dollars get booked. So we really need to understand that and what are the pitfalls that can happen there. Product costing. Do we have all of our items costed correctly? And do we run integrity reports to see that material plus labor plus overhead actually rolls up to the standard? Process control. What kind of controls do we have over our back-end processes? And by back-end, I mean sales order processes. After we do the shipment and after we decrease the inventory, we need to run invoicing. We may need to print bill of ladings. We have to run sales update. How do we control that to make sure all the sales orders get through the pipeline? Similar situation with work orders. We do issues, we do completions, we do partials. How are those transactions accounted for? When do we run manufacturing accounting, and how do we make sure that there are no problems in there? Okay. Cardex integrity. Do we actually look at an item in the JD Edwards item ledger inquiry, summarize the transactions and make sure that those transactions properly add up to the balance? That is a problem and needs to be addressed. Most companies I talk to don't have a process in place to manage their cardex integrity. And then finally, it's how do we get the inventory data out of the system, out of JD Edwards? What type of report do we run? Where does the data come from? When do we run it? So all those things are important, and we'll talk a little bit more about that a little later on. So let's get started first with the Distribution Manufacturing Automatic Accounting Instructions, or DMAAIs. And the issue number 1 is the accuracy of those. There are lots of DMAAIs that need to be entered when we first set up JD Edwards. And it is not for the faint of heart. There are dozens of tables that need to be set up. Hundreds, if not thousands, of entries need to be made. So a couple of the tips that I'm going to talk about here is the use of what I'll call a model table, and then to limit the use of the wildcards. And by wildcards, I mean the company 0000 and asterisk, 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 asterisk for the GL class code. So those, if we know how DMAAIs work, these kind of act as catch-alls, and they can get us into trouble if we're not careful with them. So first, let's talk about the model table concept. And now what I'm going to put up here is a little chart that I put together that basically just lists what AI tables are out there. And these certainly aren't all of them, but these are the basic tables that are out there, but just to give you an idea how complex these things can be. So the DMAAIs are broken down by the 4 main inventory modules, and that includes manufacturing. So we do process work orders, that impacts inventory. Of course, our standard inventory transactions, the adjustments, issues, transfers, reclasses, and such. The sales order system, we ship, confirm, and we impact our inventory. And purchasing, when we receive goods in, we also impact our inventory. So here, what we can see are all the different AI tables are set up depending on the document type and the transaction that we're performing. Now, what we have to do is take all of this and multiply it times the number of GL class codes and times the number of companies that you have to set up. So if we have 3 companies, you take all these X's times 3. And if you have 20 GL class codes, it's all of this times 60, and you can see how complicated that can be. Now, the model table and what that concept is to pick one of the balance sheet tables. So in this case, what I have highlighted is 4152 PI for cycle counts. So if we look in that table, we will see all of the entries by company for doc type PI and all of the different GL class codes and their associated balance sheet inventory accounts. So the model table concept means we need to scrub that one. We need to make sure that that is exactly how it needs to be. So we're going to limit our focus to just one DMAAI table in one document type and make sure that that's the way we want it. So if we have GL class codes that are raw material, make sure that they're referencing the raw material account. Subassemblies, finished goods, all the GL class codes are set up accordingly. Once we have a vetted out model table, now we can go into all of these other DMAAIs, which are the balance sheet inventory side, and we can compare them to our model. Now, it may seem like a straightforward exercise. Let's say I have 500 entries in this table and I just do a side-by-side. Well, it's not quite that simple, because in some of these tables, we can be making use of wildcards. And in the model table, we don't have those wildcards. So you have to be careful, right? We have to limit the use of the 0000. We have to limit the use of the asterisk, 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 asterisk. Go distinct and discrete if you can on the DMAAIs. Now, these wildcards have a place, but they're used rarely. They're not the rule, they are the exception. Okay. So once we match these up and we get our raw material GL classes pointed to the raw material account for all of these different transaction types, you'll find that you'll have quite a bit fewer reconciling items when period end comes. So again, for DMAAIs, get one right, use what you've done and kind of model it to all of these other ones, and then you'll find that your transactions will start working much, much better. Okay, moving on to issue 2, GL class code change control. Okay, so what we want here is we want consistency on all the levels where the GL class code is stored, and we want a proper change control process. So let's talk about these 2 areas. Okay, first, what level does the GL class code live? So if I have a new item and I'm setting it up, the very first thing I do with an item is I enter an item master. And as part of that item master entry, I assign a GL class code to the item. Okay, now once I do, and let's just pretend for sake of argument that we're entering a raw material. So I enter an item, I give it a GL class code, let's say RM01 for raw material 01. Now I have one place in the system where that RM01 lives. But of course, I can't transact against this item with just an item master. I have to put it into one or more branch plants. So let's say now I have branch plant 1, 2, and 3. Well, I need to copy this item into those branch records. So now I have that raw material item in 3 more places, in branch 1, branch 2, and branch 3. So now I have a total of 4 GL class codes, right? Or 4 locations where the GL class code is. Now, we're still not done, as we still cannot transact against an item that only has an item master and branch plant. We also need to assign it locations and perhaps lot numbers if we use lot control. Now, when we create locations, we create 1 primary and 1 or more secondary locations. So now you can see it's going to start multiplying down. So my 1 item master results in 3 branch plants. So now I have a total of 4. And let's say now I have 2 locations in each branch plant. That's 6 more copies of that GL class code because it lives at this level as well. Okay. So now I'm up to 10 places. So if I have to change this, I have at minimum 10 places to go change it. And that's not even talking about sales and purchase orders. So if this raw material goes on a purchase order and I have 8 purchase orders out there and I have 1 line on each one, well, the GL class code gets copied down to the line on the order. So now I have 8 more places. So you can see now if I change a GL class code and let's say I assigned it raw material 01, but for some reason it was a subassembly, or let's say it was a purchase finished goods and it really should have been FG01. Well, now I have to go back and I have to fix all my sales orders, purchase orders, my location records, my branch plant, and my item master. That's a lot of changing to do. So that's why it becomes important to have the proper change control process in place. Now, one might think it's simple. Why don't I just go into these places and key over it? And Edwards would certainly let you do that. However, you will create problems if there's inventory on hand. So let's talk about how we actually should make a change to a GL class code. Okay, so the very first step in the process should be, if there is any on-hand quantity, it needs to be adjusted to 0 with the existing GL class code, okay, with the incorrect one. That's because in the item ledger, when it records transactions, also captures the GL class code. So let's say we did that 1 receipt on this item for 10 units. Well, now I have a cardex records with RM01 for the 10 units. Well, what we want to do before we change it to finished goods is we want to do an adjustment while it's RM01. So we'll have a second cardex record that says I've adjusted out 10 under the raw material GL class code. And the reason why that's important now is because we are going to credit the dollars out of raw material. That's what we want to do on the GL side. Okay, so just typing over the GL class code on these locations doesn't fix anything. It doesn't take care of the GL side of things. Adjusting the on-hand quantity to 0 will. So once you do that, that will drive, let's say, a credit to inventory to the raw materials, a debit to some holding account. Now I change the GL class code to finished goods. Then I adjust it back with the finished goods GL class code, and now I do a debit to the finished goods account. Okay, so now my GL is happy, my cardex is happy, everybody's happy. Okay, reconciling just became a whole lot easier. So if you have programs where, let's say you have custom programs where you'll go in and change the GL class code on a branch plant, and magically at night, all of these other locations get updated. Well, if there's quantity on hand, you're doing yourself a disservice on the general ledger. You're going to have an imbalance between inventory accounts because the proper journal entry has not been done. Okay, so just remember that, and remember this process. We really should be adjusting out the inventory first, then change the GL class code, and then adjust it back. Okay, issue number 3, we'll talk a little bit about product costing. And there's actually 3 areas, subtopics we're going to cover. ledger component integrity, WIP reval, and multiple cost integrity. Okay, so first, the ledger cost component integrity is a report that you can get out of JD Edwards. Experience has shown that this report is accurate. It's a very good report. You can see the numbers 30543, and what this does is it goes through your items and it will look at material plus labor plus overhead and add them up. You can do your cost roll and compare it to the ledger and see if there are any variances. Okay, because there are instances where someone could change a cost ledger cost online at the upper level and not do it via the roll process. And if you do that, these get out of sync and they will drive manufacturing variances. So we want to make sure that this integrity report is part of our process. It gets reviewed occasionally and any fallout gets addressed, and that will save you some more reconciling items. Second is WIP revaluation, which is another JD Edwards standard process. It's relatively new, and I'm not quite sure on what version it came into existence on, but 30838 is a process where after you do a cost roll, you have work orders out on the floor that have old costs captured on them, right? So in JD Edwards, those parts lists will have old costs on them. In order to update to the new cost before the material gets issued or completed, JD Edwards has provided this WIP revaluation program, and that will go ahead and take all those parts lists, get all those costs updated, so when manufacturing accounting runs later downstream, we're not driving all of these different variances. Okay, so again, that's part of a cost roll process now. I do the roll, I revalue my WIP. So if you've ever noticed that if you're running a standard cost system, and let's say every December you do a full cost roll, and then January your manufacturing variance kind of spikes, and then it goes down a little bit in February and it starts bleeding off. Well, that's because you have all these open work orders out there with old costs. They get booked at the old costs while the inventory gets settled at the new cost, and now we have this variance that ends up showing up in variance accounting. Okay, so make sure that we understand WIP revaluation, and if we need to incorporate that into our process, we should do that. Okay, and finally, there is something that doesn't happen often, but it does happen. It's called a multiple cost situation, where inside the cost ledger, we have for an item costs at different methods. For example, an 02 is an average cost, an 07 is a standard cost, an 08 is a purchase cost, so on and so forth. Well, in the data set, those cost types are flagged. So there's a field in there called COCSIN, and if it's set with an I, that means use this method as the inventory cost. So for example, if you're running a standard cost system, the 07 record would be flagged as, oh, this is what I use for my inventory valuation. Well, every once in a while, what'll happen is you'll get two or more cost types flagged with the I. So let's say you'll have the 07 and the 02 with the I flagged. Now, if you go on to the JD Edwards screen, you will not see anything out of place. It will look perfectly fine. But in the data set, there's a problem. So if you start running reports and you're looking for the inventory value, there are two records flagged. It might double up. If the costs are different, now you're not going to know what's going on. So bottom line is what you see on the slide here is an SQL query that will actually look for that situation. And you could run it on your JD Edwards database, and it will find any item where there are multiple costs flagged as inventory. Okay, so you can take this, these slides will be available to you. You can take this query, give it to your IT department, and make that part of your process to make sure that your costs stay clean. Okay, number 4, let's control the back end. We're going to talk a little bit about manufacturing accounting, sales pipeline, and the GL batch postings. Okay, so for manufacturing accounting, we want to make sure that we have different versions running out there. So if I have a work order and this work order, let's say, takes 2 weeks to complete, I may complete it partially. So if the work order, let's say, is for 10 units, these units are big, it takes a while to complete. Well, within the first couple days, I complete 2 of them. During those 2 days, I have been issuing material each day, and I finally finish one, and then I go ahead and I complete, let's say, 2 of the 10. Those transactions need to be accounted for promptly. So the 2 versions of manufacturing accounting that should be on scheduler should be one called a partial version, meaning any work order transaction that I've done against that work order today that has been, before it's been fully completed, I still want to create the journal entries for that. I want those transactions to hit manufacturing accounting. So what you do is you set up a version of manufacturing accounting that does not update the status. It just picks up whatever activity has been done since the last time manufacturing accounting ran, and it will actually create the entries. It will not change the status. Okay. Once you complete the work order fully, now you have a full version which changes the status, which will bump it into the variance accounting stage once it's fully completed. So we want partials to catch all the activity before it gets fully completed, and then of course the status change at the end. Okay, a lot of companies I talk to, they don't have the partial version out there. Okay, so even if your work orders take 1 or 2 days to complete, right? If something gets delayed, you don't want your GL to start lagging behind because we haven't run manufacturing accounting on transactions that have already impacted our inventory. So it's important that you have both versions sitting out there in order to control your manufacturing processes. Now, on the sales side, typically after I ship confirm a sales order, there are at least one more step before I run sales update, right? So I have to ship confirm the item. I may need to print a bill of lading. I may need to invoice. I may need to send an advance ship notice. So these are all different stages of the sales order process. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have a report that has sales orders at all of these different statuses after they're ship confirmed. Okay. And before they run through sales update, which is typically at status 620. Okay. So we want to report, and I'll call that the sales pipeline. As soon as I ship confirm it, my inventory on hand goes down. My GL has no idea that this has happened until sales update is run at the end of the day. Okay, so we want to make sure nothing is hung up on credit hold. Something didn't get inadvertently moved to a wrong status and is just hanging out there, and that our sales update versions are indeed picking up everything. I've seen it where the versions have accidentally eliminated branch plants. So they had in their data selection to run for certain branch plants. They set up a new branch, forget to change the version, and those sales orders hang out there. Okay, so we need to make sure our sales update versions are out there, they are correct, and that we have different versions for transfers versus regular customer shipments. Okay, the options need to be set up differently. So our sales pipeline report, make sure that the sales orders, once they're ship confirmed, they get to sales update status in a timely fashion. And then finally, once we do get through these 2 processes here, we get into, we've created batches, but now these batches have to be approved and posted. So I recommend typically that we do this and take advantage of the automatic approve and post features inside of JD Edwards to do this. Now, I know some companies can, it's part of the business process, but if you do manual approving and manual posting, you might want to just revisit that and think, why can't I get this done automatically? And then finally, every once in a while, a batch header goes missing inside of JD Edwards. JD Edwards actually has a missing header integrity report that we can run, and if we set up our options correctly, it will automatically regenerate the headers so that the batch posting process works properly and we don't miss these batches and they don't get hidden under the covers. Okay, so these tips about controlling the back-end processes, will eliminate any lag between inventory activity and GL activity. So we want to make sure that for work orders, sales orders, that those transactions get pushed into the GL as soon as possible, and those batches get approved and posted, so that our account balances are more in line with our inventory balances. So we want to take that time lag out. Okay, now here's an interesting one, managing your cardex. And I have an example on the slide here, and we're going to talk about summarizing quantities and amounts. They should add up to the balance that you see on the top of the screen. Now, these balances that you see, the quantity and the amount, they don't come from the cardex. They come from an item balance table, which is a summary, and it's supposed to be a summary of the cardex. Okay, so what we can do, the process to validate this, is we take an item number, we get all of its transactions, we can export the grid to Excel, then we can summarize the columns. We take the quantity, we take the amount, we add them up, and we make sure that the sums add up to the numbers that you see on top of the screen. If I had to put a wager out there, for anybody who's on here, I will guarantee you that at least one item in your system has a problem when you do this. Okay, something will be off. Okay, it just happens. Standard cost versus average cost, our analysis needs to be done a little bit differently. In that, if you're average costing, it's going to depend at the cost level. Cost level is usually done at branch, so your analysis would need to be done at branch. If you're running a standard cost system, you can analyze an item right for the specific branch, location, and lot number, and the quantities should all add up. Couple words of caution, if you're doing this analysis, we need to make sure that all of our units of measure for all the transactions are in the primary. Okay, so if you have items where, let's say you buy it in kilograms and you store it in pounds, okay, then you see kilograms and pound transactions in here. Well, if you're going to add up the quantities, that really doesn't work. Those have to be converted all to primary first in order to get the numbers to match up. That is not true, however, on the value. The extended dollars are the extended dollars. You add those up, those dollars should match. Okay, there's no conversion necessary for that, right? You can have thousands, if not tens of thousands of items. It's a cumbersome process. JD Edwards does have built-in integrity reports for this, but they are dependent on an as-of table being built and maintained. And again, most companies I talk to, they don't have that in place. Okay, so again, managing the cardex is important. If you suspect an item has a problem, then you can do the exercise that I just laid out, and we can make adjustments to that. If we have a quantity problem, we'll have to get IT involved and do some kind of SQL statement to get this quantity to match the sum the way it's supposed to. If we have a dollars only problem, we can actually do an inventory adjustment, a dollars only inventory adjustment to fix this amount. Okay, so again, a lot to consider here, but it is important. Okay, now again, these balances come from 41021, 4105, not the item ledger, which is 4111. And finally, how do I get an accurate inventory report out of JD Edwards? Well, there are two choices. There are two ways I could go about it. First is, I'll call it a balance-based report. And all that is I take a snapshot at the end of the period. So this report that I'm running, be it the Edwards report or one that I've developed internally, right, will just go out and say, give me all my items, give me all the costs, give me all the quantities, let me do the math, I have a total, right? Simple, straightforward, based off the balance table, okay? But what happens when you have 24/7 operations? Okay, when this inventory report is run, typically there are procedures in place for everybody to be off the system. Nobody can be transacting. There has to be a quiet window in order to get an accurate report. Okay, and then even if I do that, what happens when I start backdating transactions? Okay, so let's say I ship something on the last day of the month, but I didn't book it to the first day of the month. Well, my inventory report says that inventory left on the last day of the month because it was a balance base and I had ship confirmed it on the last day of the month. Okay, but I didn't really want to take the credit until the next month. Well, now I have a problem because, well, it was gone, but I really didn't want it to be gone. I wanted it to stay to the next day. Okay, so there are inherent problems when you just try to run that snapshot at period end. So we have to concern ourselves with 24/7 operations. We have to concern ourselves with backdating transactions and trying to control things that way. Now, the second way that you can go about doing this is we can generate what's called a transaction-based inventory report. And basically what that is I'm just going to add up transactions. I don't care what the balance is, right? I'm going to take my transactions, which, by the way, if I add them up, should equal the balance, which is why we need to manage our cardex to make sure that they do. And then I can run this anytime, because once the period is over, then I will not have transactions in that period anymore, right? So operations do not have to stop, right? I can bucket these transactions into the prior period and get my totals that way. So your operations can continue. So this is a cumbersome process though. If you are putting out thousands and thousands of transactions every month and you've been on JD Edwards for 10 years, right? How can I get a transaction-based report? If I run this report, aren't the lights going to dim? Isn't it going to take 4 hours to run, right? So how can you efficiently get this type of information? Okay, well, that's where RapidReconciler comes in, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to give you a very brief demo on it. So what RapidReconciler is it's a proprietary product that we've developed at GSI. We've had it validated with Oracle, and it is designed specifically for JD Edwards. And we've have years and years of experience in JD Edwards, in distribution, in inventory specifically, and understand the problems that exist when we try to tie out our perpetual inventory to the general ledger. So we not only do we cover perpetual inventory, we also cover goods in transit, you know, the old STOT process, and received not vouchered as well, right? So something to consider. We're focused on inventory today. So the benefits of using RapidReconciler is we have integrity reports that are built in that cover the issues, the top 6 issues that we reviewed today, plus much more, right? So we have reports that will find, you know, the mismatched DMAAIs for you, that will look at your GL class codes on all the different levels and make sure that they're consistent. We have a built-in WIP report or a cost ledger report. We also have the multiple cost report. It's all part of the product itself, so you don't have to develop anything. And it's all accessible by the end user. Okay. As far as the back end is concerned, we track all the work orders that haven't made it through manufacturing accounting. So if I have activity on a work order, we detect that. Okay. If it's not in the GL, we detect that and we let you know. Same for the sales order and the sales order pipeline. You have a sales order. Let's say I ship confirm it, but after I've ship confirmed it, all of a sudden, I decide, well, I really didn't want to do that. I didn't need that. So I go into speed status update and I just change the status on the work order to 99 and 999 and I skip right over the sales update part. Well, we're going to tell you that that happened. Okay. We're going to tell you that here's the sales order. It's at status 999. There's no GL activity for this. So we can't have that. Right? So I shipped it, I've reduced my inventory, I must account for that. Okay. Unposted GL batches, we're going to tell you, here are the batches that aren't posted. Here are the batches that don't have any headers. Right? So we need to run that job to get the headers put back, otherwise we're going to have a roll forward problem into the next period. Okay. We do a transaction-based inventory calculation. Okay? We don't need your entire history to do that. Okay. We also do not use the JD Edwards as of table because experience has told us that it's not being maintained within most companies, so it's not accurate. Okay. So all of the things we talked about are all covered inside the RapidReconciler product. So what I'd like to do is just kind of give you a brief overview of what I've been talking about. I'll show you the product, and then we'll get some question and answers going. Okay, so here is the RapidReconciler interface, and notice I'm viewing it in Google Chrome, so it is a web-based application. Now, because it's web-based, what it does not mean is that your data is out there on the web, because it is not. Your data resides on a server that is behind your firewall. You access that data through a web page, so there's nothing to install on your machine. Okay, the web page serves as the container for the application. Now, if you were sitting at home and you had your credentials and you logged into RapidReconciler, this screen would be blank. Okay, you don't get to see your data unless you are on your corporate network. Okay, if you're sitting at home and you VPN into your corporate network and log into RapidReconciler, you will see your data. Okay, so you can do it from remote locations, but you must be VPN'd in first. That's how we maintain the security of your data. Okay, so with that said, RapidReconciler is a database, and a database means that I'm not just trying to reconcile one period. It builds up over time, and I can go back and look at reconciliations from periods past. Okay, we have some indicators on top to give us a quick snapshot view of, does everything add up correctly? Does our validation work? And this is a green-red scenario. And did my job run and complete successfully? And it will tell you when the last time it ran and how long it took. So you get that type of information. Now, by using your DMAAIs, what we can do is we go into that model table that I discussed earlier, and we extract all the company numbers, business units, objects, subsidiaries, okay? And we lay it out for you this way in a filter format. So if we have multiple companies, we can select one or more. In this case, I've only selected one. Okay, if I select more, you'll see that I get the business units and subsidiaries added into the filters for that. Okay, and all the totals will adjust. So I can do this in any combination I want. So I can do it, you know, if let's say your business units are your branch plants and you want to reconcile by branch plant, you can certainly do that. Okay, object accounts, subsidiaries, whatever combinations you want. Pretty straightforward, check or uncheck. Okay, when you do that, the totals come down into your valuation, where you'll see what's in the GL. Okay, what is the total for the GL accounts I have selected for the period end that I have selected. And oh, by the way, let's compare that to the perpetual balance. We've done a valuation, transaction-based valuation, okay, done by items and depending on that model DMAAI table and how the GL class codes are set up. Okay, so now we can do an apples to apples comparison and tell you what your out of balance is. Okay, so not only can we do that, we can tell you where the problem is happening. Do I have one of those GL batches that aren't posted or is missing a header? If I do, I can see them. I can preview the details. So your first glance is this number 0? If the number's 0, I'm fine. All my batches are fine. What is end of day? End of day are, I have sales orders or work orders that haven't made it through the back end process. So they're hung up. I'm looking for a 0. All right. So then if there's amounts here, I can do a preview. I will get a list of the work orders and sales orders that are holding up the show. Okay. Any data that you can access here is all exportable very easily to Excel, and it can be emailed around. So if you're looking at this and say, oh, I have all these work orders that are at status 40 and they need to be run through manufacturing accounting, I could just produce that list, send it off to the shop floor, and get them to do, run the manufacturing accounting on that. Okay, cardex. This manages your cardex. This will summarize all of your item transactions and compare to the balance. Okay, if any item is off, there'll be a dollar amount here. Okay, that will only show up in the current period. So this cardex right now is perfect. Okay, everything adds up accordingly. If not, what will happen is I can get a detailed listing of the items that don't add up, and we can take our corrective actions accordingly. Okay, so that's basically how RapidReconciler works. And then of course you're able to drill in and get all the details. Okay, here's a history. How far am I out of balance? So this will take this number and plot it out over time. So 2 years ago, or a year ago, I should say, I was in balance, in balance, in balance. Whoops, we slipped. If I click on this, where did we slip? We had transactions, but we overshot that with a journal entry. If that journal entry was minus 38 instead of minus 68, we would have been back to zero. But for whatever reason, okay, we went and corrected that in the next period, got back to zero, zero, zero. So you can see how this works, right? If you were flatlined at zero, your inventory system is perfect. Everything is working, no problems, okay? Now, I can go through a whole bunch of stuff. We don't really have time for that right now, but the last thing I want to show you are some of the integrity reports that we have built in, okay? Such as, here are your J.D. Edwards DMAAIs as they're entered in the system, all laid out. They're grouped into sales, manufacturing, purchasing, inventory. They're labeled as inventory or expense. You can export this grid to Excel and you can filter. These are all the DMAAIs, not just one table at a time. So if you were going to try to extract this information out of J.D. Edwards, forget it, because you can only extract and see one table at a time. Okay, here you get the whole thing. All right, we have the model table. Here's our 4152, right? In our case here, we're going to use document type 99 that we set up. Here's the GL class code. Here's the account number that gets associated with it. Okay, do we use flex accounting on this? So we support flex accounting. Where does the business unit come from? Is it the branch plant? Is it hard coded? Does it come from flex accounting? So we can determine a lot of things just by looking at the data that we see here. So it is a much more comprehensive look at your DMAAIs. Okay, if we had any issues in the model table as we compared it, I don't know if you remember that eye chart where the green blocks that says take the 4152, compare it to all the other ones. Okay, we have a report for that and we will highlight the discrepancies. Oh, by the way, RapidReconciler removes all of your wildcards. So if you have asterisk, 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 asterisk for your geo class code, we have a list of all your geo class codes and we make discrete entries in the sequence as Edwards would pull them and use them. Okay, so we can tell you how your system is going to behave even though you're using wildcards. Okay, so we do other things like unit of measure conversion integrity. There's no pound to foot conversion for this item, so you're going to have transaction issues. So we need to get this stuff fixed. Okay, and you can see GL class codes. These are the ones where we have problems amongst the levels. Well, you're on the branch, it's NS40, but in the location, it's SECD. What should it be, right? It shouldn't be different. They should be the same. Okay, so frozen cost. Does my material, labor, and overhead add up to the frozen? No, it does not. Okay, so we have some items here that need to be addressed. Okay. Duplicate costs, that's the duplicate cost report I was telling you about, so on and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. It addresses all of the issues that I was referring to on the slides, plus a whole bunch more. So that's the end of the presentation for today. So what I'd like to do is turn it back over to Brooke and we can have a Q&A session.
Great, thank you so much, Ed. Let me know when you can see my screen.
I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Ed. That was great. I would like to cover a few follow-up items, and then we'll get into the question and answer portion of our webcast. Today's webcast is part of GSI's free ongoing educational webcast series on J.D. Edwards. And our upcoming webcasts are currently listed on the screen. We are adding more a couple times a week. So make sure you check at getgsi.com/JD Edwards webcast. And we also have our 9.2 upgrade workshops happening over the next few months. Our next one is in New York on the 6th. So if you go to getgsi.com/JD Edwards Conferences and Events, you'll be able to find it there. And we provide free, extensive educational resources for the JD Edwards community, including our weekly educational webcast, our monthly newsletter called the GSI Insider, our online resource center where you can access our on-demand webcasts, white papers, and so much more. And we also offer on-site and virtual workshops. Now, if you would like to sign up for our weekly email reminders for upcoming webcasts, our monthly newsletter, or to create an account to access our resource center, go to getgsi.com. Then you can scroll over to resources and events on the main menu, and then you can select JD Edwards on the right. All right, I see that we do have a few questions submitted online, and I would like to remind everybody that if you would still like to submit a question, you can do so using the questions panel on the right side of your screen. And if you minimized your console earlier, you can click the left-facing arrow key to redisplay. All right, you ready, Ed?
I am ready.
All right. So our first question is from Madi. Madi says, is there a report or other way to see which AAI was used at GL entry to find which transaction used you got it? Okay.
Yeah, I got it. The wild card zeros and the asterisk.
Yes.
And and Marty, to answer your question, not that I know of. Once a transaction has happened, there's really no way of going back and seeing which DMAAIs were actually used. There is something that I've seen done in the past, which actually is quite clever. If you were to set up a transaction in your test environment and you change the DMAAIs to actually put the table number in as the object account or as the subsidiary, you will know which DMAAI was getting hit. Now, when you key in DMAAIs into JD Edwards, the account numbers are not validated, right? Because of flex accounting and stuff like that, they don't. So it's almost free form. You can type in what you want. But when you do that and those accounts aren't in the chart of accounts, well, you're going to get errors. In the test case, you want the errors so you can see which DMAAIs are getting hit. So for example, let's say I'm doing a ship confirm, and I want to see all the AAIs and the amounts that are used by this particular sales order transaction. Okay, so I can go into all the different tables for that one order type. I can put in for the account number, the 4230 for revenue, the 4220 for cost of goods, so on and so forth. I can change my sales update to not summarize the batches, to post them individually. And then I can see what amounts go to what AAIs. But that's the only way I know how to do it. After the fact, it's not possible.
Okay, great. Another question for Maddie, and the question is, can you confirm the report name of the missing header batches?
I will have to get that for you. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it is a standard report. And if you go into JD Edwards, I think you can search on it. You can search on batch header or just search on the word header, and you should be able to find it.
Okay, great. Maddie said thank you. All right, perfect. Well, that appears to be the end of our questions for today. I want to thank Ed for your presentation and everybody for the questions you've asked today. And a follow-up from today's webcast, we ask that you complete a short 1-minute survey when you exit, and you will be receiving an email with a link to our resource center on our website where you can access the recording from today's webcast as well as a copy of the presentation. And then after today's webcast, we will do the drawing for a $25 Amazon gift card, and anyone that attended the entire webcast will be eligible, and we will notify the winner. So if you have any follow-up questions for myself or Ed, our contact info is currently listed on the screen. And again, we want to thank you, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, guys.
All right, bye-bye.